Greetings and welcome to this episode of Go XDGO, the official podcast of XDGO. XDGO is an action-oriented design leadership consultancy that focuses on helping organizations, teams, and individuals understand, embrace, and sustain the practice of experience design. I'm Matthew Doty, founder and principal consultant of XDGO. This episode continues a series of episodes focused on design leadership. In this series, I interview both leaders of design as well as leaders who value good design. My goal is to explore what it means to be accountable for designing great experiences, as well as what it takes to organize and enable the practice of experience design from the leadership perspective. In this episode, I spend some time with Meghan McInerny, the Director of Strategic Experience Design at Best Buy. As an experienced leader, Meghan has demonstrated skill in customer experience, digital strategy, user experience, client services, workshop design and facilitation, project management, leadership, and team building. Meghan is also the co-author of Interactive Project Management, Pixels, People, and Process. For those of you listening to this podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please make sure to check out our YouTube channel so you can see our smiling faces as we discuss, learn, and laugh together. A link to our YouTube channel is included in the description of this podcast. All right, so to kick things off, what I'd love to do is I don't know if you could just take a few minutes and who is Meghan? I was speaking about you as if you're not here. Who are you?
Should I talk about myself in the third person?
You should. Meghan. That would actually be a really interesting exercise. I don't know how long I could keep that up. So yeah, just tell us like who you are, what you know, who are you? What's your career been like? Yeah.
Okay.
Then we'll just go from there.
Yeah, I have had a long and winding career journey. So I'll give you the shortest version I can. I originally went to the U of M School of Journalism and majored in copywriting. So I thought I would be a creative. Mm-hmm. And largely that was because as a young person, I did not know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And my parents were both in advertising. And I was like, that looks good. I guess I'll do that.
Right.
I know how to write. So I went to school, and then I ended up working my way through school while also working at a company called Gage Marketing in Plymouth.
I know Gage.
Yes. And I was an account person. And I also went to the creative director and said, hey, I know I'm an account person, but I'm going to school for copywriting. Can I get some creative assignments? So I was doing my account management, client management job, and then getting some creative assignments and got to work on some cool stuff. And while I was there, I met Nancy Lyons, who is the CEO of Clockwork now. At the time, she was president of a company called Bitstream Underground. Okay. And Bitstream was an internet service provider and a web development shop. And I met her in this meeting and just thought, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I need to go work for her. So I pretty much stalked her for several months. Before she finally gave up and realized.
I'm so glad we're recording this.
It's well documented. I've often said like she kind of had two choices. It was either give me a job or get a restraining order. Like those were the choices. I am glad that she opted to actually offer me a job.
Right.
But what she ended up saying finally, she threw up a lot of roadblocks, and I would just keep like going over the roadblocks. And the last thing she said was, the only job that I have open is as my assistant. And if you want that job, you can take it, but it's a step down in pay. It's a step down in title, but if you want it, it's yours. And I just had this powerful gut feeling that like, yeah, even though this does not make a lot of sense on paper, like this is what I'm supposed to do. So I left my job and I went to Bitstream, and, probably about a week before I started, the person who was their lead project manager unexpectedly quit. And so I never actually worked as Nancy's assistant. I just slid right into a project management job.
Nice.
And I just remember feeling when I got to that company, like, oh, these are my people. Like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I had never thought about a career in technology. But really kind of found my groove. And the web was so new, this was 20 years ago, that like there was not really any such thing as a strategist or experience design. The words user experience weren't really around yet. And so what that allowed me was to kind of create this career for myself where I was this hybrid of like a person who knew how to get things done like a project manager, but also had this like strategic creative brain and could provide value to projects in that way too. And because there weren't any of these different job titles, I just kind of got to do all of that stuff.
Right.
So yeah, so when they sold that company, we all parted ways, and I went off and worked at a few advertising agencies in Minneapolis for a few years. And then in 2006, I joined Clockwork, which Nancy had started with a couple other folks after she sold Bitstream, or they sold Bitstream. And I was there for almost 14 years. And then this past February, I up and left and just thought and again, it was a similar gut feeling to what I felt when I described going from Gauge to Bitstream, which was, this makes no sense on paper. Like, I love Clockwork, love the vision, love the leadership team. I had a great job. I was chief operating officer there, loved everything about it. And yet there was this little voice inside me that was like, you're supposed to go do something different. But I knew I couldn't answer the question of what I was supposed to do next while I was still there, because that place was too professionally and personally important to me. And so I just thought, I'm going to take the leap and, take the leap and the net will appear. It was like, let's be serious.
I like how you said that.
It's really funny. Like, I do believe in all of that stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
Anytime
me too.
I say it out loud, like, I have to say it in that voice. Like, God, get a load of yourself. But anyway, that was like, my Oprah moment. And I just like,
right.
So I leap, and the net does appear, but also a pandemic appears. And so that was a really interesting time to be looking for something new. Yeah. While the world was kind of falling apart. So I really do believe, though, that when you are following those gut feelings, that like things tend to fall into place. And that's what happened. I found this role at Best Buy, which you are very familiar with.
I am.
And it just sounded like, that's like, I was looking for something new and different. And I thought, this checks all the boxes. I've never worked in retail. Never worked for a large corporation. It was really moving me from operations more to the strategic design side of things. So it checked all the boxes. So I decided to give it a go.
That's awesome. So speaking of design operations, do you get to, like, how have your interactions been with Fred Beecher? Like, you said you moved from, so I did a podcast with him. And you said you moved from kind of this operations role. Now you're more into the design strategy, but he's kind of gone the opposite way. He's like super into the operations. I'm just curious, this has nothing to do with our topic today, but I'm just curious what sort of interactions have been between you two.
Yeah. I've had great conversations with Fred, and I think it's probably for the reasons you just described, that we've each been on either side. So I think we come at our conversations with each other with like a deep respect and empathy for whatever the other person is doing. And I think the interesting thing about talking to any operations person, I think people who do a lot of operations work get sometimes underestimated in the value of the knowledge they have, but often they have such deep understanding of how an organization works. And the truth is that in any organization, small or large, but it's even more true the larger the organization gets, it's not just your idea. It's not just like, I have the best idea, and so therefore we're going to do this thing. There's all of these mechanics of like how you get the idea out, or how you get the right people, and how the system is structured, and then what happens to the people in that system. And when we don't spend enough time thinking about that, I think it's easy to get super frustrated and just say like, if only everyone would listen to my idea, this would all be solved. And it's like, well, yeah, but you've got to get 50 other people on board with your idea. And the cool part about ops people is they're constantly navigating those pathways in the organization, and can be really helpful in helping other people understand how the system works and where you might want to go around something, where you need to go through it. So I think he and I kind of get each other in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love what you said too. It's like, it really is tempting in those situations if you're not paying enough attention to and respecting kind of the systems at play, whether or not you agree with them. But if you're not doing that, it is really easy to fall into that temptation of being like, oh, they're just not listening, or oh, this is terrible. And feel like your job is done just by identifying the problem and saying that it's bad.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, what are you going to do with that?
Yeah. And every single one of us in the world, maybe not every single one of us, most of us in the world, believe that everything would be better if everyone else just thought like we did, or like used our ideas. And so it's like, the more people you have that are all thinking that way, the more you have to get skilled at how you articulate your idea and how you sell that idea to the people around you.
Right. Yeah, that's really, really interesting, especially when it comes to, I mean, the whole subject of design leadership, I think, has to do with recognizing that the percentage of decisions that even as design leaders, that we own versus influence. And I think I did this blog post about how to work with people and be tactful yet persistent. And I had this pie diagram that was just like this little sliver of decisions you own, and everything else is you have to understand where others are coming from and demonstrate how what you're doing is going to help them. It's just super, super fascinating. So yeah, good times. So when did you first kind of take on what you would consider a leadership role? It doesn't necessarily have to be with design, but just when you found yourself in a position where you had to either own and make decisions or influence decisions or both, or lead others.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think I have two answers. The first is, without being able to probably name it or recognize it, I have always been a leader. And so the first example I can think of where I was leading other people was in elementary school. I can remember having like an idea, like we should all go to the mall. We should all go to Rosedale. I lived in Northeast Minneapolis. It was like, let's go to Rosedale Mall.
Right.
And so what I would do is I would like convince a group of friends, we should all go to Rosedale. I would figure out whose mom was going to drop us off, whose mom was going to pick us up. I'd make all the calls and like get all the stuff organized. Right. So like in retrospect, as I advanced through my career and was doing kind of project management, strategy and leadership, I was like, oh, I've always kind of had this thing where like, I see what I want to have happen, and I also can see what I have to do to help make it happen. So how are we going to convince so-and-so's mom to bring us there? And then how are we going to convince, like, then this other mom could pick us up, and just like that comes naturally to me, this ability to see like, okay, these are all the pieces that need to come into place. I would say the first time professionally that I really thought to myself, or I realized, oh, other people see me as a leader, is when I was working at an advertising agency, and they had hired a new person to lead the department that I was a part of. And all of the people I was in a digital department, and they hired a person who came from more of a direct mail background, and we were going to be merged with like a direct mail group. And so a bunch of people on the team had all these concerns about how this was going to work and all these questions. And they basically nominated me to go to the CEO of the agency and ask all these questions. And so I remember sitting in the CEO's office and just like asking him these questions and saying, hey, here's how the team sees this, and what do you think? And then going back to them and telling them what he had said. And it was in that exchange, because my title was, I did not lead that group. These were all of my peers. And that's when I realized like, oh, for some reason, even though my title doesn't say that I should be the person that goes and has this conversation, the people around me think I should be the one to go have this conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they just thought I was a sucker and I would do it, but
let's get Megan to do it. Like, it's like the old Life commercials.
Yes, Mikey will eat it. So
He'll eat anything.
One or the other. Yeah, it's either that I was a leader or I was highly gullible. Is one of the two.
Right. Well, I mean, who's to say it wasn't just a little bit of both?
Yeah, could be.
Exactly. So I'm sure you've been asked this question before, or at least some form of it. So I'm just going to pose it to you, and we'll see where the conversation goes. So from your perspective, what would you say? How would you define design leadership? I'll just stop there. I won't qualify it with anything.
Yeah. So I don't know that design leadership is any different from leadership, period. Like, I don't know that I don't know that I define it separately. So when you reached out and said you're interviewing design leaders, I thought, I don't know that I consider myself a design leader. I do now, at this point in my career, consider myself a leader. And what is really important to me, and I think this is important for any leader, is I really love working with people who are really skilled and helping to translate whatever they're talking about and trying to accomplish with other people who don't speak the same language.
Right.
It's the same reason I loved being a project manager on digital projects, because I love working with developers, and I loved being a person who could help translate between a client who knew the outcome that they wanted but couldn't articulate it in technical language, and the developer who often had really specific needs from the client but similarly couldn't articulate it. And I think the same thing happens with design, where sometimes there's a temptation on either side to tell the other person what to do or how to do it.
Right.
And I like being a person who can help both people or both sides get on the same side and talk about, like, what is the shared outcome that we want together, and how do we bring these specific skills and ways of thinking that we have to make that outcome the best that it can possibly be.
Yeah, I love that. And I love what you said about you don't think of design leadership as kind of separate from just leadership in general, because, and I'm just going to kind of summarize just because this is what I'm getting out of it. Because it's like any leadership is really about helping the people that you're leading or advocating for, work with the people that they're trying to influence, and kind of being that intermediary. And I mean, at the very least, that's like from your perspective, what I'm hearing is that is a critical, if not like the foundation of leadership in general.
I think so. Yeah.
Did I hear that right? Okay.
Yeah. And most, whether we're talking about design, or we're talking about engineering, or we're talking about like any specialist, feels misunderstood by the people around them. Like,
oh my gosh.
Right.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Like, that is such a good nugget.
Yeah, well, it's really true, right?
It is. It's totally true.
You're going like, no one understands me. If only they understood. And like, the truth is that probably nobody will understand you, right? We're all too busy in our own heads doing our own thing. And so I think the job of a leader is to help make sure that people do feel understood and seen. And also that you're then challenging them in how they're showing up with other people. Build bridges sounds so cheesy, but really does need to build those lines of communication. And so that thing that I talked about, where I really enjoy being like a translator, I think good leaders have to be able to do that. Like, sometimes I think about it as like different countries, right? And you're sort of like negotiating between different countries who speak different languages, who sometimes have like a little bit of a different, they have a different culture, they value different things, but we have to somehow come together, create an alliance, and get something done. And so like you have to be able to cultivate that. Right.
Oh, so much to unpack there. I want to go back to, because I think this is the second time this notion has come up, is one of the things we have to do as leaders of design is acknowledge that idea of, yes, specialist, it's really hard for people to understand you, but that's only half the story. Now, how do we turn around and do something productive?
I think it really comes down to the more people trust each other, the better they're able to communicate, because to bring it back to Brene Brown land, like they're able to show vulnerability. And if you and I are talking and I don't trust you, and I think that you know something I don't know, I am unlikely to show any weakness with you, right? So that starts to manifest as just a really dysfunctional relationship between the two of us, because I'm going to get more and more stuck in demanding what I want and not necessarily listening to or respecting where you're coming from, because we're locking horn. It's a power thing instead of a collaboration thing.
Right. And we're kind of in this vicious cycle of trying to duke it out over who is right versus trying to figure out and follow what is right.
Yeah. And that's not to say, like, as we're talking about this, I do think part of a leader's job also is to advocate, because sometimes it is true that in some organizations that whatever the specialty is, whatever the discipline is, that it is underestimated. But like any designer will recognize this phrase, can't you just okay, like engineers get it too, can't you just like, and if it's followed by the phrase bang it out, like then you just throw yourself out a window. So that phrase, like in that phrase, immediately the person receiving that phrase hears what you do is easy, and I don't like, because I don't understand it, I think it's easy and you should be able to have this done by the end of the day. Right. And so it creates this friction. And I do think it is the job of a leader to help others who are not in the specialty understand that while this team, these people are not any better or smarter than you, the output that you value from them, it takes some time to get there. And so, you know, I think it just all comes back to, like, I think as a leader, you're always walking this delicate line of like, what am I shielding the team from? Because there's just a lot of, whether you're talking about a product team, a project team, a discipline team, you know, a community of practice, there's always going to be this like sort of outside noise that if you let too much of it come into the team will just become a total distraction, right? So in some ways, the job of a leader is to hold that boundary and to understand when I need to just shield the team from the like stuff that's happening.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
And then conversely though, is like not preventing the team from building those direct relationships with people outside the team. And that's what I mean when I say the balance. It's like, you have to be an effective filter, but you also have to push the team and create space for the team to have those relationships and conversations. Like you can't be the figurehead and you can't be the bottleneck. And so it is a constant balance that, honestly, I've had people ask me like, well, how do you know when you're sharing too much or not sharing enough or like not creating enough space? And I'm like, you know, when you mess it up, that's how you know.
Yeah. And if you're afraid of making a mistake.
And you have to, as a leader, have to have the humility to say to the team, I thought that was a distraction to you. And so I was not sharing this information with you. And it turns out that would have been really helpful context for you. And I'm sorry, like I'm going to adjust that moving forward. Or, hey, I thought it was going to be helpful context, and turns out that really just stressed you out and caused a whole bunch of spin for 2 weeks. And I'm sorry. So
right. And I think that just what you just said about humility, I think it goes a long way to what you were saying earlier about trust. I think if we don't have like, so I think about the relationships that we're discussing. You have the team, you have the team's leader, you have the clients, we'll just use that as a blanket term, that the team is trying to serve. And I think about if there are not the appropriate levels of trust in those relationships, then we are going to, I think one of the biggest things, especially in the design space, one of the biggest problems with that is creativity becomes stifled, and because we're afraid of saying the wrong thing, or saying, or like you're talking about, making a mistake, not making a good decision in terms of what we share versus what we protect our teams from. But if there's that level of trust, then along with that often comes kind of like, and I use this as, for lack of a better term, kind of this grace that we need to have with each other, to allow each other to make mistakes without automatically assuming evil intent. One of the things that I found myself saying a lot is when we would talk about different things that people were doing, I would say, now, I don't think they're evil. I really don't believe that whoever we're talking about or whoever this team is, I don't believe that they are evil. And I think it's important that we recognize that, because again, our stupid, lizard brains that go so quickly into fight or flight are very quick to kind of demonize and villainize the people that we just simply disagree with, or maybe we just simply don't understand. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think like what you're talking about comes down to what is someone's intention versus what is their impact.
Right.
And,
yeah,
there's parallels with this. It's an important concept in all levels of our work, whether we're talking about the work itself, whether we're talking about gender dynamics, whether we're talking about racial dynamics. There are all of these areas in which I might say or do something that doesn't sit right with you, or doesn't feel good to you, whether I intended it to feel that way or not. And if we don't have a trusting well, let's start with the positive. If we have a trusting relationship, you then are able to stop me in the middle of that meeting and say, Megan, like the way you said that, like that made me mad, or that hurt my feelings, whatever it is, right? And then because I trust you, I trust that you care, and I appreciate you being direct and candid with me, I can then receive that and say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Let me rephrase that.
Right.
When there is not trust in our relationship or between our teams or whatever it is, what happens is I say the thing, it makes you mad, you say nothing, you hear nothing for the rest of the meeting because you're so busy thinking about how horrible I am.
Yep.
At the end of the meeting, you say nothing. Then you go tell 10 people what a horrible person I am. I don't know that I've done, right? It's just like it builds.
Oh, that is the
itself.
worst.
And it happens in organizations all the time. And I'm saying all this because I think that's another really key part of being a leader is recognizing when that's happening. Because as a leader, you'll get lots of conversations from your team members after that meeting happens, right? Where they're like, oh yeah, I just had this meeting and like, okay.
Right.
Too much of that happens in all organizations. And I think it's because it feels scary. And I understand why. It feels scary to tell someone, I don't like that you did that. Like it feels too direct or too, I don't know what. And then it doesn't feel good to be corrected. I have been corrected publicly. It sucks, but you have to just like suck it up and go, ooh, okay, ooh, little embarrassing.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, and take it with grace and be like, thank you, while your face flushes and your armpits get sweaty, and then you say you're sorry and you like fix it and you move on, right? And you usually feel gratitude, actual gratitude, like 6 hours later, but in the moment you say thank you.
Right, all of the adrenaline has then had an opportunity to kind of go by the wayside, and you can think rationally again.
Yes, but it's like we all have to get. We have to get better at that, because I think like if we can't say it about work, then those other examples I gave that are really like real dynamics taking place in the world and in our workplaces, the stakes just keep getting higher internally for people to say those things. And we just have to get better at it. Yeah.
It's, well, and it's very, very hard to, are you a fan of like crucial conversations?
I have heard of it. I haven't read it.
Because everything you're saying is like, it's almost like you read it last night.
I haven't read it. I have read what I think is probably a similar book called Radical Candor.
I'm going to put that on my reading list.
Yes. So I'll read Crucial Conversations. You read Radical Candor, and then we'll regroup with a little.
But I mean, I don't think you need to read it, because it's very like straight up, like exactly. Basically, it's like kind of the subtitle is like tools for talking when stakes are high, because their whole premise is we have to develop like habits and techniques to counter what our biology wants to do in stressful situations, when the most productive thing to do is to stay in dialogue. our biology, I mean, literally our biology is 180 degrees from that.
Mhm.
So anyway, so yeah, it's just super cool, but I'm going to totally check that out. And I just love anything that has the word radical in it.
It's a framework that I really like. The way that she outlines the concept in the book is like a quadrant, and you've got caring personally and challenging directly on either side of the spectrum.
Right.
And so the radical candor quadrant is challenging directly while also showing that you care. And I think that, again, as a leader, I think that's a really important thing. And so coming into the role that I have at Best Buy, knowing that part of being a leader is having those crucial conversations or having radical candor with the people who work for you, and knowing that I was coming in the midst of a pandemic, could not go to the office. Aside from the people who interviewed me, I have never met in real life any of the people on my team.
Yeah.
But it's like, what I knew I was going to have to do as a leader is work extra, double, triple hard to build that trust and build those relationships and show people that I care, so that when the time came when I had to like say something direct and difficult, that it wouldn't be received as like, who is this person coming out of nowhere? She doesn't know me at all. Like, so, you know, I think in the moment that we're in right now, where we are so physically distant from each other, this notion of showing people we care, building trust, being trustworthy is like underscored, double, triple, because our only way of doing that with each other right now is like getting on video calls. Like, we don't get to bump into each other in the hallway. We don't get to just like see each other in the lunchroom. It takes a lot more thought and sort of like prioritizing of your time to say like, I am going to prioritize building relationships, because I know that the work won't happen well if it doesn't start with the relationships that I have.
Right. Ah, good times. There's lots of good there. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and ask you, we have like 10 minutes left, and I'm just going to ask you maybe one to two more questions. The first one is, if you, and I'm guessing you've probably been asked this before, if you were in a conversation with someone who believed that they wanted to take on a leadership role, and especially in the context of leading some aspect of experience design, so whether that be research, strategy, design, or you know, any kind of combination of the three, what would be like, where would you start? What if they just kind of ask you the blank question, hey, I'd really like to, you know, become a leader in this space, what would you say?
I think the first question I would ask them is, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to be a leader? Because I think when some people ask that question, what they mean is like, I want a title, or I want like, and I don't mean to denigrate that, like the titles can be meaningful, like whatever it is, but saying those words can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And so just first understanding, like, what does that mean to you? Is it that, is it, what does that look like? Because then that, I think, would influence what I would tell them to do. The thing that I would say to any person considering being a leader in the sense that I think about it, which is like, regardless of title, you want to have a positive influence on the team and on the work. And you want other people to look to you as someone who knows what they're talking about. Is basically, how are you showing up as a leader now? And because I think a lot of people assume that you get leadership by getting a title.
Like you have it bestowed upon you, versus you're naturally demonstrating these things and it becomes a fit.
Yes. And you can get a title and become a boss, but a boss isn't the same thing as a leader. And so to be a leader really means, it's like that example I gave you of when my team members were like, you're going to be the one who goes and talks to the CEO. That, like, figuring out, how am I showing up in a way that other people want to listen to what I'm saying, or they do listen to what I'm saying, or I'm influencing them in some way that is meaningful to me or is affecting the output of the work.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, I gotta say, it's really hard to talk about leadership, because then what almost came to my lips was like, oh, well, like, how are you gonna get people to follow you? Which just sounds really gross.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is not the, like, it's not the intent of what I want to say,
Mm-hmm.
because
Right.
I don't think that good leadership is really about people following you, but
Mm-hmm.
functionally speaking, to be seen as a leader means that you have the ear of people, that there's
Mm-hmm.
something like, here's an analogy I use, because I'm a nerd. I love Lord of the Rings.
Nice.
And I, a couple years ago, gave a talk about project management as a leadership role. And I was
Mm-hmm.
in my example saying that that a leader is really the person who inspires us to move in a particular direction, even if we have no idea how we're going to get there, right?
Yep.
So in Lord of the Rings, Gandalf is a leader. He assembles the Fellowship of the Ring, a bunch of people who have almost nothing in common, but he gets them to all say, like, yes, we're going to, even though some of us are sort of natural enemies, we are going to band together because,
Right.
yeah, what you just described, we're going to do that. We don't know
Right.
how, but we're going to do it. The manager in this situation is Samwise Gamgee, in case you're wondering, but we don't need to talk about him in this conversation.
Sure. I would love to at some point just like explore this metaphor to like beyond what it was meant for.
Yes. But I guess I will say that, like, as the manager, he's the one that figures out how we're going to actually get there,
Yeah.
right? And he's the one that is walking beside Frodo the whole way to the mountain, right? So anyway, all of that is to say, to me, a leader is just the person who gets you to go, yeah, let's go. Like, wherever there is, that's the kind of person that you're like, yeah, let's go. And I think what's hard is that that's not a thing that anyone can give you.
Right.
You either have it or you cultivate it on your
Right.
own, but it takes a lot of self-awareness and humility to be that person, to figure out if you are that person and how to be that person.
That's really interesting. It reminds me of a conversation I was having with somebody last week. I connected with an old colleague that I haven't talked to in 12 years. And he was asking me, you know, like, oh, hey, what have you been up to? And I was just kind of going through the last 12 years of my life. And I found myself saying, I don't think this is exactly how I put it, but the sentiment is there. I said, I found myself over the last 12 years taking on leadership positions because those allowed me to help people in ways that I wouldn't be able to otherwise. If that makes any kind of sense. And I think the larger context of that conversation was like, I personally have a really strong passion about discovering who people are and what they want, and helping them recognize their own inner awesome, and helping them like pull that out and amplify it. And I can't think of many other kind of structures
Structural structures. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. That'd be a good band name. Or roles other than leadership type roles that allow you to kind of have that kind of influence and stuff like that. And it feels like that's very much in line with what you're talking about.
Yeah. The metaphor that I always have in my head for that is, I think about people as padlocks, and like each person has their own combination. And if I can like figure out the combination of like what makes this person work and what makes that person work, then like in your language, like I can help them unlock the awesome.
Yeah.
And that's a great feeling to be able to do that.
Especially when they can't see it themselves.
Yes.
Oh, it's so cool.
Yeah. And I think that's actually a problem for a lot of people, is this idea that there are certain things that we are highly competent at that are totally invisible to us.
Yeah.
And when people around us can help us see that, like for me, for a long time, when I started my career as a project manager, I literally was just like, I don't know, any dummy can do this. What am I going to do when I grow up? And it took me a long time to realize like, oh no, actually, this is a set of skills that not everyone has, but it was just a thing that came to me. And so I assumed that just like it came to everybody in that way.
Right.
And so sometimes you do need somebody to reflect back to you the things that you're so good at, you can't even see them yourself.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So good.
The thing that I was going to mention that is like I almost called it the dark side of leadership, but I don't think it is actually, but it is the part of leadership that no one wants to talk about, which is the other part of being a leader is that you also have to be the person who is not afraid to make the call when it's time to cut someone from the team. So if we're going to use, I guess I'm just a bucket of metaphors today. I think I love like and I'm not into sports at all. So I don't know why this is popping into my head. Maybe because I was watching the Michael Jordan documentary. But if you think about
that's another thing to add to my list.
Yes. If you think about the coach of a team, the team is seeking an outcome. And if somebody on the team is not is not playing their part in getting to the outcome, like the coach has to be the one to be like, you're done, you're cut. And like, and I think that is an aspect of leadership that people don't like to talk about and don't like to think about because it does suck. But when leaders abdicate that responsibility, the health of the team and the awesomeness of that individual do not get realized. And sometimes people, it's not that, it's not you, it's us. It's like anytime I see or feel someone struggling on a team, or in an environment, what I want them to hear is it shouldn't be this hard. Like if you're in the right place for you, it will not be this much of a struggle, right? So it's like if you're constantly having to like try to coach someone into just like showing up the way they need to, it might just be like you are a saltwater fish in a freshwater pond. We just need to get you into different water so that you can really thrive. Okay, so far we've done Lord of the Rings, basketball, fish.
Right.
I'm on a tear.
Oh, it's amazing. Okay, so we are pretty much at time. I do want to kind of like the last thing that I do is if there's anything that you were hoping to kind of bring up or say or cover in this conversation, given the very little context that I gave you, that you haven't gotten to say yet, does anything fall into that category? Any kind of parting words of wisdom or things that you wish we would have talked about, but you just didn't? We just didn't.
No, I think we covered the full spectrum of leadership.
Yeah.
We really did touch on kind of like all of it, the good stuff and the hard stuff.
All right. Radical. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Go XDGO. A special thanks to our guest, Meghan McInerny, for joining me today. Our next podcast will continue our focus on design leadership and will feature Alan Arlt, who's the founder of Ultimate Hoops and the head of basketball operations at Lifetime Fitness. Until then, please like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. To learn more about XDGO and how we can help you, your team, or your organization build your experience design capabilities, please visit us at www.xdgo.io.